today, we're going to talk about whether you should start a startup and whether you should apply to Y Combinator. Spoiler alert, the answer is yeah, you should, because it changed my life and put me in touch with some of my closest friends and collaborators. Today we're talking to one of them, my friend John Coogan, co-founder of Soylent and one of the best tech YouTubers today. He went through YC himself twice. Let's get started. One of the most common questions I get is, hey Garry, should I start a company? If you're a recent grad, you're probably wondering if it's safer to join a company like Microsoft or take a risk at a startup. You might have seen this in one of my older videos, but one of my biggest mistakes in my life was saying no to Peter Thiel when he first invited me to join Palantir as their first software engineer. But you know what? I get it. The thing I was always taught at a young age was to go get the steady job for a big tech company. It was impossible to think of an alternative when you have a job offer from Microsoft. Here's John's story of when he decided to become the co-founder of Soylent.
I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to school in Boston. I studied economics at Northeastern University. And I like to think I went there because Biz Stone, co-founder of Twitter, went there, and Sean Fanning, co-founder of Napster, went there. But really, I don't know, probably just a random school that I applied to. I don't know if you remember this, but my first company was a software company, an app,
of course.
And I actually pitched it to you at Imagine K-12. And at the time, it was a much smaller, it's like a smaller spin-off of Y Combinator.
Right.
Imagine K-12's now been absorbed into Y Combinator.
That's right.
But there were some similar partners, and they had a little bit of, it wasn't a full demo day, it was just kind of a show and tell.
You're doing a quiz, was it quiz on Facebook?
Yes, it was a quiz app on your phone. That you had to authenticate through Facebook to meet a competitor.
Right.
So the idea was you could load up some trivia questions, and then you would be presented with some multiple choice questions based those, so we could kind of programmatically generate the questions, then we could compete and see who won, and hopefully we learned something in the process. Didn't really go well. I was still learning to code at the time. I remember you coming around and me, I'd read your blog and I was like, oh, that's Garry Tan. We got to make a good impression. And you were very polite and you gave some really good feedback. And I mean, we asked you a bunch of design questions because that was kind of your specialty at the time, and you had a great blog. So it was just a very funny thing. And then, a year later, Soylent gets going and we got to work together again.
For people who don't know, Soylent is people. No, it's actually food.
Yeah.
It's actually this idea that maybe you could make personalized food out of the things that your body actually needs, right?
Yeah.
But that wasn't the first version of that startup. It was actually originally Meow Global Networks, right? So it was actually a networking hardware company, and they were your housemates.
Yeah, exactly. So I was living with Rob and Matt and a couple other guys who were working on a wireless networking technology company. It wasn't going anywhere. We couldn't get venture capitalists to pony up millions of dollars to go install cell phone towers, essentially. It would have been a very, very capital intensive business. But it was really fun to tinker with the technology. So even though it wasn't going anywhere, we liked what we were doing, and we started getting faced with this problem, like we're running out of money, but we don't want to go get real jobs. We want to keep tinkering. And what's the best way to do that? Well, if we can make a product that will allow us to eat food more efficiently and save money on food, which is really the only thing that we're spending money on other than rent, which we paid a year in advance, and our internet bill. We already owned our computers. What else do you need when you're building a startup other than just a place to live?
Well, you need pizza, ramen, or something to eat, I guess.
Exactly. So that's where Rob starts coming up with this idea for a more efficient food so we could stay healthy, because ramen, famously, not the healthiest, if you at least buy it at Costco like we were doing. Yeah. It just became kind of a little bit of a mini viral phenomenon in Silicon Valley. It was kind of my first introduction to content marketing, because Rob was such a powerful writer. He would put out these blog posts and they'd be incredibly controversial because
they'd go viral.
They'd go viral because everyone has an opinion about food.
Right.
Everyone wants to say,
well, I eat food.
I eat food. I have an opinion. I know something about it. And so that's how we just got so much attention. And then, of course, we built the business and developed
I have to admit, I was a partner at Y Combinator at the time, and Rob came by and said he was working on this. And I was like, this is super interesting. Like, this probably, if people are really resonating with it, that's great, but you got to change the name. Which was terrible, terrible advice. And that was actually a really big lesson for me to realize that, 8 or 9 out of 10 people might hate it, but it actually didn't matter because 1 out of 10 people found out about it and they were like, this is awesome, actually. I mean, I was one of those people.
Totally.
Like, I lived on Soylent for at least a year. Exactly. I don't know, something like that.
That's a success story for us. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the idea of like niching down to blow up. So you create this very thin niche, and then you kind of build out from there. So the people that didn't get the joke and didn't understand that it was a reference to a sci-fi novel, they spread it, or they were upset about it, or they thought it was a bad name. They would spread it, and then people that got the joke, they became the in-group.
I mean, how many tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of earned media do you think the name alone was worth? Or maybe billions, I'm not sure.
I mean, Rob went on the Colbert Report. That's late night TV,
you can't
national.
Buy that.
You can't buy that. The only other startup that I'd ever seen on the Colbert Report was Brian Chesky, Airbnb.
Yeah.
And we were not at that level. We were like 5 people on a shoestring budget. And he was on when I think he was probably past unicorn status.
And that's such a crazy moment, actually, to just realize that you can reach that many people. What John and Soylent taught us is how important it is to validate your idea with potential customers, talk to your users, and really make sure that people want what you're building. And once you figure out what problem you're trying to solve with your product, the next most important lesson is how do you get it in front of other people? You can't sell a product if nobody knows about you. Another question I get asked all the time is, hey, should I apply to YC? Getting into YC can feel like winning the golden ticket to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. At least that's how it felt for me. It is the Silicon Valley golden ticket. But maybe let's back up for a bit. What is the experience actually like for a founder going through YC?
The first time I applied to YC, I actually got rejected. And it's kind of an interesting lesson that I think a lot of people should kind of have in mind. When I applied, we had myself and one co-founder, and then a third co-founder who had a great pedigree. He was a computer scientist from Columbia, even stronger programmer than I was. I was still kind of learning at the time, but he had actually taken the whole coursework. But he was kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Mm-hmm. He was, in his mind, he was like, I will join you guys if you get into YC.
Yeah.
If you don't get into YC.
We had one of those guys too, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely respect it. Like you're trying to de-risk, I understand, but it's just like, it's not what YC looks for.
Yeah, totally.
And I think you put it well where you said like, if I were, a YC interviewer and I said like, Garry, what are you going to do if you don't get into YC? What's the correct answer?
We're going to prove you wrong. Exactly. That's the answer, actually.
Yeah.
That's so funny you had one of those guys. We had one of those guys too.
Yeah.
And you know what he left to do?
What did he do?
To go be an intern at McKinsey.
Oh, wow, yeah. That's
instead of start a company with us.
Wow. Yeah, and you probably done so much more.
He would have made a lot more money, honestly.
Definitely.
But more importantly, I think he would have learned all the things we learned that we use now.
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
Like, how do you actually get these things off the ground? Like, McKinsey happens like any time, honestly.
Exactly.
It's like, come on, dude. Like this can only happen now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is actually like the best, when people are trying to get people to come and work on a startup, that I think is one of the most powerful things you can say to anyone you're trying to recruit, whether it's a co-founder or an engineer or executive or whatever. It's like, that other thing, it's safe.
There.
It's gonna be there, right? Like that thing already has product market fit.
Yeah.
It's like finance or whatever else.
Yeah.
It's like finance is not going away.
Yeah.
Like that job, opportunity, like that's gonna be there. It might not be that team, but it'll be 1,000 other places. But this is only happening now. Yeah. So you gotta quit. Okay, let's say you watch this far and you've decided to quit your cushy job. Maybe it's a tech, maybe it's finance, maybe it's, like me, a decent day job as a PM at Microsoft, and you've decided to apply. The next big question, that matters a lot is, how do I get in and what's the application process like? John actually went through this process 3 times as a founder.
What I found about the YC application, because I've filled it out, I think 3 times now for different companies, is that it helps clarify your thinking around your business in some ways, in the same way that building a slide deck can, but it's a little bit lighter touch than building a full slide deck. And it just gets you writing, and it gets you thinking about, how can I express these concepts in a simple way that is still powerful enough to let someone understand how this can get really, really big. And I think that a lot of people are taught when they learn to write that maybe they should leave the best for the end or something.
Inverted triangle for sure is the right way to do it.
Yeah, inverted triangle, just like when you're writing a newspaper article, you want to lead with the most important facts.
Don't bury the lead.
Don't bury the lead, exactly. And that's absolutely true in a Y Combinator application, because people are reading these things fast. They need to understand what you do, why it's important, how it will get big, and most importantly, I feel like just where you are. Oftentimes I'll hear from people who say, hey, I'm building this really cool thing, and I have to ask 5 questions to learn that it's 2 people, or they have 50 people, or they've raised $500,000 or $10 million. And just helping people understand, because all these different traction metrics and kind of understanding the energy that's going into a company, it's all highly dependent on where you are. If I come to you and say, hey, I have a business that's doing $1 million in revenue, that means nothing to you. If you've raised 100 million, hey, maybe you gotta pick it up.
The tricky thing about this is, especially on YouTube, we're talking to people out there who are from all over the world, and have they might be literally still in high school all the way up to later in their careers, and so they might be anywhere. And so if we zoom out enough, the really interesting thing is actually, how do you build a team of people who are complementary, who sort of span the set of things that particular startup idea actually needs. And then one thing that I do think YC really wants, but then not out of some arbitrary thing, it is actually necessary for a startup to actually work. It's does your initial team have the skills necessary to get to that first milestone, right? And it might be software engineering skills, might be design skills, might be PM skills, might be sales, might be direct marketing. Usually
a startup needs 5 skills. So you're hoping that those skills can be found in just 2 or 3 co-founders. So a lot of times you'll have the person that can do, some design and some engineering, and then you'll have someone that can do some product development and some sales, and really showing that you can kind of hit all the different elements.
If you only have the startup and that's it, when it gets hard, these things start flying apart, actually. And that's the number one thing that kills startups, actually.
I've been working with the same co-founder for 10 years now, and I don't think it's a surprise that we went to preschool together, because we kind of know where each other live, and our families are friends, and we kind of know that, hey, we have a shared value. We understand that there's something bigger here that we're building. Obviously, the startup's really important, but that relationship is really, really key.
Some of the people who are watching this right now are sort of in a rush. They're I want to do this. I want to do this now. And we're sitting here with the founder of Flexport, Ryan Peterson, a few weeks ago, and he was saying, he moved to China. He became one of the top importers for, I think, electric motorcycles in the United States, for instance. And so he had all of these 10,000 hours of all of these other experiences before the moment that he started Flexport, and all of it sort of fed into it. I mean, that recalls Steve Jobs' famous sort of story of auditing a calligraphy class, and that's why we have fonts in our software today.
That's
right?
Crazy.
So I think that's one of the weird things to sort of temper this advice, right? It's hey, it's good to be in a rush. It's good to have urgency for starting a company, but also get good at some stuff. Actually, definitely. I mean, some of that is in 100%, your story where 100%. You're in there making an app from scratch, right? And over and over again.
There's definitely a craft to all of this, and you have to have respect for the process and develop some mastery. yeah, I've talked to a lot of like middle schoolers and high schoolers who are like, and I'm always like, do not drop out right now. Let's build some more skills. Let's enjoy the time you have, because I keep coming back to, like, obviously we focus a ton on Zuckerberg because he dropped out of college and it was this phenomenal success, but the founder of Workday was practically a senior citizen when he took his company public.
There's all kinds of different times
you
for
can
this.
You can really be any type of person and be a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah.
There's certainly not just one mold. And I think that's something that needs to be said more often, I think, for sure.
That's it for this episode. This was a special one for me because, as I said to John, I felt, kind of like he was a kindred spirit. We both started our YouTube channels from just an idea. We weren't sitting around waiting for someone to come and teach us anything. We just gave it a shot and made a bad first version. And then we kept doing bad versions until it got mediocre, then good. And then, we're still out there trying to do our best. To this day, I'm forever a student, and I still, try to share YouTube tutorials with everyone I meet. We do this to help each other and to continuously improve our craft so that each and every video is better than the last one. If you watched all the way to the end and like this series, be sure to head over to John Coogan's channel right now and click subscribe and watch his video with me. On John's channel, we talk about what you do after you get accepted into YC and how to get the most out of your YC experience. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next week.